one of the reasons we started with stories is, of course, because of our Pixar heritage. But the other is, story is what makes us human. It's really about connecting with people emotionally and communicating. And working in teams, you also, develop team building skills, giving and receiving feedback. So lots of 21st century transferable skills. It's very few people are going to be story artists at Pixar, but everybody tells stories and everybody has to be an effective communicator.
Hello and welcome to episode 165 of the Human Restoration Project podcast. My name is Nick Covington. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this episode is brought to you by our supporters, three of whom are Dan Carney, Kevin Gannon, and Julia Valenti. Thank you all so much for your ongoing support. And with the help of teacher-powered schools, SoCal Moran partners, Simpunks, and What School Could Be, we've completed the lineup for our fourth annual virtual conference to restore humanity for July 21st through 23rd, focused this year on the quest for connection. Between now and then, with each episode, we'll briefly spotlight one of our conference keynotes, workshops, and panel discussions, beginning with Building Nourishing Collaborations, Exalting Our Children and Their Caregivers, our 2-hour day one workshop led by Nawal Karuni, a Jersey City-based educator and author of Nourishing Caregiver Collaborations. Our work as educators requires stepping beyond school-centric one-off events and practices to more deeply embed authentic, engaging collaborations with caregivers that celebrate what families inherently bring to their children's literacy learning. By embracing compassionate care and advocating for talk, choice, and observation, we can reimagine adult-student partnerships. This workshop will address biases, explore personal language stories, and work to validate family practices as we weave them into our work in schools. If that sounds interesting to you, tickets start at just $50, and you can find the full lineup at humanrestorationproject.org/conference. We're excited to have members of the team from Story Xperiential with us for today's episode, which was recorded way back in 2024. Developed by veterans from Pixar and Khan Academy, Story Xperiential brings the art of professional storytelling into the classroom, giving students the tools to craft and share their own stories using the same creative process as major studios. The program is structured to fit into school schedules, offering a 2-part curriculum: Storytelling Essentials, where students develop a story outline into a story reel, and Mastering Storytelling, where they expand their work into a full narrative. Through self-paced lessons, hands-on projects, and a moderated peer feedback system, students not only learn the technical aspects of storytelling, but also gain confidence in their creative abilities. One unique aspect of Story Xperiential is how it can be integrated into every subject area, aligning with interdisciplinary content standards, bringing together social studies and ELA, for example, or STEM and fine arts, while also fostering skills like collaboration, critical thinking, and visual communication. In this episode, we'll explore how Story Xperiential is being implemented in schools, hear about the impact it's having on students, and discuss how storytelling can be a powerful tool for learning and self-expression. Now, you're going to be hearing a few voices in this conversation. HRP Director Chris McNutt is hosting this one, who you're probably used to hearing on the show, and he'll be talking to a few people on the Story X team. You'll hear first from Dennis Henderson, VP of Education and Strategy.
It would be so amazing to do a project in which kids can emulate working at Pixar.
Chief Technical Officer Tony DeRose.
I left a tenured position to join this little company that nobody had ever heard of called Pixar.
And Chief Learning Officer Britt Cruz.
What do the professionals actually do, and how do I do it the way they do, and how can I start that as early as possible?
You can learn more about Story Xperiential and sign your students up at storyxperiential.com.
Let's just start with some basic intros. We'll just start with that. And if you could just do like a quick, 30 to 60 second who you are, what you do. And then from there, just to make it a little bit more seamless, do any one of you want to tackle the what is Story Xperiential question?
Go ahead, Dennis. Go for it.
I was going to say, it's funny, we all started at the same time, huh? It's very interesting. Just a random event where you happen to be sitting at a table with a group of interesting people and having a conversation with someone. As a teacher at the time, I was actually administrator of a school, principal of a school, and had sitting at the table and had a conversation with the person next to me, which happened to be our founder, Elise. And she's like, "What do you do?" "I'm an educator." "What do you do?" "I work at Pixar." And as someone that's always been intrigued and about doing project-based education, especially with people that's doing amazing work that youth may be into, I kind of picture that my dream of, it would be so amazing to do a project in which kids can emulate working at Pixar. And she kind of smiled and was like, "Are you serious?" And said, "Interestingly, we have a small grant. We're working on this little project here. A colleague of mine, and we're putting this together right now." So that conversation kind of led to this journey in which we did a little camp, Pixar in a Box camp. And Tony will tell more about that. But just to see this coming together of people within the industry that's doing this real work that young people truly recognize. And it's a sincere, authentic connection that we know we do some stuff that's amazing that the world don't really have access to. And we would love to show the world how this works. It started from that natural place of just a sincere place of exposing young people to how things work and not just showing them, but allowing them to do it. And that was the spark. And Tony could go into more context as far as the inside Pixar piece, but as an educator, I felt so inspired to meet individuals such as Elise and Tony and Britt that sincerely are passionate about teaching young people how to do real world things.
I'm trained as a computer scientist, computer graphics researcher. So I spent 10 years at the University of Washington, built a graphics lab there, and then did the unthinkable as far as my parents were concerned. I left a tenured position to join this little company that nobody had ever heard of called Pixar. That was in 1996. Spent most of my time there running the graphics research group there. But, as a professor, I loved teaching. And as my kids started, getting into school age, we started doing a lot of, home education, got super interested in the maker movement. So that was kind of my first exposure to project-based experiential learning. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Started doing a talk called Math in the Movies, kind of a public lecture that, people seem to really respond to, kind of showing the degree to which math and science is used in the production of Pixar films. And people were going, oh my God, I had no idea that, all that algebra and stuff I was doing in middle and high school actually got used. So, people were asking me to come to their classrooms, but, couldn't be everywhere, of course. So Elise and I started scratching our heads to try to figure out, well, how can we tell these kinds of stories in a much broader way? We finally realized we could use a partner in online education. And so we were an expert in, how Pixar makes films and how math and science is used, but we weren't online educators. So we eventually found our way to Khan Academy, knocked on their door, and Britt and a few others answered. And that led to a project called Pixar in a Box, which was really successful. Maybe Britt can say a little more about that. And then we did Imagineering in a Box after that, telling the story about Disney Imagineers and all the wonderful things that they do. And then in 2019, Elise and I left Pixar, and in 2020 we founded our company X in a Box. And then in 2021 we started prototyping Story Xperiential.
My name is Britt. My background is in engineering and computer science. And when I left school in sometime around 2009, I started a YouTube channel to kind of teach the history behind a lot of modern fields of study, and kind of as a hobby. But by accident, in that first year, I posted a video. Sal Khan and the Khan Academy had started. At the time, was really just a YouTube channel. And I was lucky to kind of meet Sal Khan through YouTube commenting. And I joined, and he said, hey, why don't you come work for us? So I dropped what I was doing and joined Khan Academy in their first year, and was really focused on engagement and what we could do to make content more engaging, just in many different ways. And while I was there, I bounced around a lot. And so I was in charge of partnerships for a time. And again, when Pixar knocked on the door, I definitely pushed my way up to be one of the ones that answered it. And so that is how we met. And kind of what came out of that work was a desire to share with young people, as Dennis said, what do the professionals actually do and how do I do it the way they do? And how can I start that as early as possible? That was kind of the initial guiding principle behind why we did it. And as Tony mentioned, when we started our company, maybe I'll just mention two things that kind of evolved out of those initial projects, which were very much Pixar in a Box and Imagineering in a Box is a really great video series that breaks down how theme parks are designed and breaks down how films are made. And it defines deliverables, but that's kind of it. And so what we did when we started our company was, well, what can we do to take it to the next level? And what's missing there is literally actually just going through the creative process. And kind of what I learned by studying what they did at Pixar is the creative process really comes down to getting good at sharing work in progress many, 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 many times along the journey, both your own work, but also being able to look at unfinished work of others and give substantive feedback. And that's really it. And that applies in every domain. So we had this idea of Xperiential, the learning platform, as a platform that would enable this, because we recognized at the time, every learning platform was similar, where you can drop in videos and then a test, and then sometimes there's like a message board at the bottom. Basically, that is every learning platform in many different ways. And we thought, well, what if we started by realizing if the goal of this learning process is getting good at peer feedback and iteration, what if we built starting with that mechanism, which was always missing, which to us took the form of what we call a gallery, where we imagined a platform where you would upload your work at multiple steps and engage with a community of creators around you to give and receive feedback on your work, and end with a industry recognizable prototype. And so that was the idea for Xperiential. So whether you're wanting to develop a concept album in music, a story, a video game, whatever it is, we wanted you to go through industry recognizable deliverables and build a mental model for how work gets done in the real world. And it just so happens that because we had Pixar in a Box kind of ideated, Story Xperiential became the first offering that we have live, where you basically go through the work of what they do at Pixar to come up with an original short. And now today we're working on our second Xperiential focused around entrepreneurship. In a similar way, you go through the actual process. And in this case, you come out with a pitch for a business. But in Story Xperiential, you come out with a concept for your own short story. And so that's kind of the journey to Xperiential.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said, and I really respect the fact that our organization goes to a lot of education technology conferences, spaces where teachers are gathered to listen and learn and find the new latest and greatest thing, right? And sadly, you're kind of inundated with a lot of, I would say, surveillance technology or tracking technology, or here's how you put the numbers in, or here's a better way of seeing if students are using AI, or here's how AI can assist you in writing your lesson plans, etc., as opposed to actual deliverable content experiences that are rich with learning. And Human Restoration Project is really focused on design thinking, project-based learning, having kids do the thing, have them emulate what it's like in the real world with people in the real world. And something that you all are doing, which is really fascinating, is you're not only giving teachers a platform to work within that space, you're also equipping them with the outside experts. So it's kind of an all-in-one package to help answer that common question around PBL, which is, how do I get started? What is the first step of doing that? Well, you could just go through this 8-step process, and there's a starting point that could make you more comfortable with PBL.
Yeah, I'd like to build a little bit on the kind of the
Sure.
model of PBL learning that we've developed. PBL is, project-based learning is fantastic because that's how people learn, right? They learn by doing, not by listening, typically. And most of the really successful project-based learning contexts, have learners and a mentor there that kind of coaches them through the actual practice of whatever the domain they're working in is.
Right.
And that's fantastic when you can find really good mentors. But we were wondering, how do we do that at scale? Instead of 20 kids in a classroom with a really good mentor, how do we have 100,000 students in a classroom at the same time? An online experience, and you just can't find 5,000 good mentors to to coach that many students. And even if you could, you'd have to pay them so much, nobody could afford to take the class. And so kind of an aha moment for us was, well, let's look at, industry professionals, potential mentors, and break what they do into two pieces. One piece they do is the teaching. Here's how I do my job. Here's an example. Here are the concepts behind it. Here's how I apply those concepts. And that scales really well with video these days. So we have the professionals for the teaching, and then the coaching part, we replace mentors with peer-to-peer learning. And so Britt mentioned these uploads, these deliverables. At each step, you upload your work to the gallery, and then peer-to-peer learning kicks in. We've got some mechanisms to ensure that everybody gets feedback from others in the community. And so those peers are getting, good at providing solid feedback, listening to feedback, taking those notes, and making their process better. And after almost 2 years now, we've really demonstrated that this peer-to-peer learning actually works really well. And we know that from everyday experience as well, right? Kids learn best from kids. Adults learn best from each other. And we've just built this platform that enables that kind of rich peer-to-peer interaction. And so that's the model that we feel like allows us to deliver project-based learning at scale and affordably. The bigger the course gets, the better the peer-to-peer feedback gets.
For sure. And it perhaps will help the audience a little bit as well to just dive a little bit into what does a quote unquote successful final product look like? What is the goal of this work? What are you hoping to see at the end of the process?
Looks like you muted, Dennis.
Every time I say the best stuff in the world, I'm muted. So as Britt has stated, that final product is going to be an industry recognized prototype. And in this case, it is a story reel. It could be 2 to 3 minute story reel. And when you see the final product, especially from the very first to the last and how it's developed, not just the educators, but the students themselves see how rich the product gets with that feedback. So, it's this learning experience in which they're really giving each other this feedback, and a teacher pull teeth sometimes when they give a student back and say, hey, I need you to redo this. Whereas this iterations that's pushed by the peers that's really looking at your work, students are inspired to go back and redo. But when they're done, they have an industry recognized 3-minute story reel that they can use for colleges, for Upwork, for jobs. So it's quite amazing to watch them go through this process. And again, to them, it's a process, a fun process, engaging process. But when they're done, it is an industry recognized portfolio piece that they can use.
And I'll add, because I was surprised by this, our program's not about animation. And so when Pixar and any studio mocks up an animated film, it is done with hand-drawn images, generally sequenced together with, one drawing every few seconds. Bare minimum needed to tell the story and feel the story and see if it resonates. So students in our program can just use pencil and paper, very simple images that they chain together. And we don't actually focus on animation.
And before we dive into some of the goals of this work, to be sure, the way that this gallery system works is that at every single phase, from conceptual to story to final product, students are submitting into this gallery. They're able to see each other's work across the entire cohort, not just their class, and offer feedback on each one of those steps, right?
That's correct. Every step along the way. And the beauty is, again, as they get this feedback along the way the platform is set up, there's actually space for them to follow each other. So they become kind of fans of one another. There's dialogue in which they can, give feedback and, be more specific on what they appreciate about what they're sharing. So again, it really builds a community, which it makes it more than just this kind of a generic feedback, but it really becomes this community of supporters amongst themselves.
Yeah, yeah. And something that I appreciate, and this is kind of yes-anding something that you said earlier, Tony, is that it offers the ability for teachers who are moderate to like pure experts, I suppose, on project-based learning, which is recognizing that PBL takes a lot of work, requires a lot of planning, it takes a lot of extra steps. But if you have a foundation present that has things like videos and online sessions and a platform there for you, you can do things like just focus on planning the really cool field trip where they go to, let's say, a Comic-Con, and let's do that, and that'll be really cool, and we'll build that into this story experiential process. Maybe it's, we'll have students go out in their local community and interview people, and that's how we generate the initial stories that we'll tell. Maybe you partner with a local museum. For example, in Michigan, there's an Indigenous history museum, and they're doing mythology and folklore. That could tie into the story process. So it enables teachers who, one, maybe have no experience with PBL as like their first time ever experiencing this. They have that mentorship model. They're able to rely on this resource, all the way up to folks who are very comfortable with doing design thinking, but need just help because all teachers need help with the work that they're doing.
Exactly. And, even the best, PBL teachers, haven't been inside Pixar for 20 years and don't,
Sure.
Aren't domain experts in how stories are crafted. And so we wanted to package that knowledge in a way that would be easy, for teachers to deliver, freeing them up from having to think about all the scaffolding and, so that they can do those things like, plan field trips and, make sure that the team dynamics are working out and that students are really digging deep for, stories that are personally meaningful to them. In Story Xperiential, the prompt is very simple. It's, tell a story that's important to you. And, the belief there is if it's important to you, there's some universal truths and other people are going to find it impactful as well. And one of the reasons we started with stories is, of course, because of our Pixar heritage. But the other is, story is what makes us human. It's really about connecting with people emotionally and communicating. And working in teams, you also, develop team building skills, giving and receiving feedback. So lots of 21st century transferable skills. It's very few people are going to be story artists at Pixar, but everybody tells stories and everybody has to be an effective communicator.
Right. I love that focus on collaboration, both at the micro level within the classroom to build the story, but then the focus on collaboration within the platform with folks really around the world that are engaged in this cohort. What does that feedback process look like? What are your goals for students as they're working through each one of these steps in that community?
I just want to add to Chris the point you made of like in the ideal world, this is what a teacher would do. And we just had a lot of great stories. I'll just give you one, for example. Alex Campbell from Elizabethan High, for their world history class, they wanted to cover the theme of addiction and recovery and worked with a local recovery program and actually had people from that recovery program come into the classroom to seed stories. And that was just an incredible example of this in action where, again, they were freed up to do that, which is bring the projects to the next level. So I just wanted to add that. And in terms of, so that's about that in-person collaboration, but in terms of the online collaboration and what we built specifically, it started with a simple idea, which is if you see my background, it's a snapshot of the gallery. It looks kind of like YouTube with a whole bunch of thumbnails. And the problem with YouTube and online things generally is there's like an uneven distribution of attention where one person gets 99% of it and most people are ignored, at least at the beginning, which is the worst time to be ignored on your first upload. And so our idea was, what if we just even the distribution in a flat line, basically force the attention to be equalized amongst all projects? And the first way we did that in our very first version was, before you could go into the gallery, we created a gallery lock mechanism, which basically presented to you with 3 or 4 random projects, asked you to provide feedback there with some feedback assistance. And until you did those 3 or 4 required feedbacks, then the gallery would unlock. allowing you to go comment on a lot more. But that simple lock mechanism ensured we'd have the bare minimum needed to cover. And we find that once you get a bare minimum number, you kind of ignite the community because everybody's being heard. And then it can kind of spiral on from there.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important, I think, aspect of this, is that that's where that learning is happening. And because you're ostensibly forced to go through each one of those steps, it requires the design thinking process to work, or else the process doesn't make any sense. I know that in order to move on to the next step, you quite literally have to upload and provide feedback, or else you're just not able to access that. And within each one of those steps, this will be my last what question, I suppose, like what is the thing? What are kids literally doing? Like, what does one of those steps look like?
I'll jump in. Each step has a very similar pattern to it. So at the beginning, there's a kickoff video that clearly explains what the deliverable is for this step and shows some examples of previous work. Then there are some additional examples of previous work so that students both have a clear idea of what they need to do in this step and some of the range of possibilities. Some of them on the simpler end, some of them on the much more ambitious end. And then there's a series of videos that introduce the concepts necessary for that deliverable and deepen the understanding of those concepts a bit. And then most importantly, at the bottom, there's an upload your work. So this is where, after they go through these exercises, they're all optional. Some people just, jump to the bottom. They already know exactly what they need to do for the deliverable. Some people need a little bit more scaffolding. Once they go through the learning, then they typically will start drawing and writing whatever their deliverable is for that stage, and then recording some voiceover. So an example is an early stage is called What If? And the deliverable is come up with 3 what if questions for what stories might be. So for example, what if toys came to life when humans left the room? Right. So very simple, high concept, but really, really fun. And the deliverable there is come up with 3 what if ideas, a sentence or 2 about each one, and maybe a drawing to go along with each one. Make a little video in that form and upload it and get your feedback.
Yeah. I mean, I think that conceptually, and I should add too, to clarify, is your overall goal with the platform to have students be moving through each one of these steps kind of at their own pace within a classroom environment, or does it matter and how students are progressing?
We tried to make this very flexible, where it's really to the discretion of the educator in the room. We put it out there where, you can walk through this by yourself, but then we're also very intentional of providing resources and suggestions of how a teacher can roll this out within the classroom setting and lockstep. So yeah, as Britt stated, in short, we tried both.
And we do have deadlines, which we know are important. So we have exhibitions you can work towards. Our next one is coming up in December. And if you aren't ready, you can submit to the one followed.
Right. And I just love that idea of having students be able to focus on purposeful work. At least I would love, if it were me teaching the class, having those checkpoints enabled, but also letting kids be flexible with how they reach those checkpoints, so that kids can work at their own pace to the best of their ability. And it delivers that quote unquote, and it's kind of cheesy, but like just in time learning, which is the holy grail for a lot of educators, especially if we're talking about moving beyond worksheets towards something that's real, that kids are working on. And I was wondering if you actually had more of those success stories, because to me, it gives me chills to think about what that means to have kids partner with local community members, or tie it to a really interesting curricular thing, or tie it to their local community. What are folks using the platform for?
I'll give one more example, and so Tony and Dennis can think of one. I'll do very quickly. One was an unexpected use case where a father and daughter did the program together. And it was such a bonding experience for them that the father, who was works in the police force in Ontario, said, you know what? well, we're trying to do all this youth outreach and it's always in sports. Why don't we use Story Xperiential as a youth outreach through the actual police station? And so they set up a room in the police station, offered it to youth all over the community that they had engaged with as a fun place they could come every week to work on original stories. And they, like you said, because the program's well designed, they did things like provide snack and pizza and put up cool posters and made the environment really nice. And so a group, I don't exactly know the number, but it was probably around at least 20 young people went through that program together just recently and came out with a lot of amazing stories, again, because we push people to tell personal stories. That's the way this works best, or stories that are personal to you. And so we had this father-daughter relationship grow into the father bringing it to his work, and again, we never expected this to be being used by the police. We assumed it was for school, but we're surprised by these unexpected use cases. And that was one of my favorites.
One of my favorites was participants vote on each other's work, and we have recognition awards 3 times a year. And then we do a kind of an Oscar ceremony where we announce the winners and talk a little bit about each winner. And for one exhibition, there was a winning story about a slice of pizza who had dietary issues and couldn't eat various foods and was trying to figure out how to navigate his way through life. And as the story went on, there were more and more medical facts that were introduced that were very oddly specific. And it was like, I wonder, is this a personal story? And it turned out it was. The student who created that story, Mason, was hospitalized, and he was creating this story from his hospital room where he was suffering from really severe digestive issues, and the doctors just weren't sure how to treat him, and so this was a form of therapy for him. He's doing much better now, fortunately, and he's been recognized in all sorts of other places for this story. He and his mother created a children's book out of it. So it was obviously something that was really important to him. And by telling his story, other people could, connect with what he was going through to I think an extent that they might not have been able to otherwise.
I want to hit the one that that's the one that brought tears to my eyes. I'm not too manly to admit that. So that one always resonates. And just overall, one of the things that I love that comes out of every one of them, every time we come to the conclusion and we have our exhibition, just the empathy that you see from young people that have connected from all across the country, different parts of the country, and they're really celebrating each other's stories. They don't know who's who. They don't know everybody's background, who they are, what they look like, and all that stuff. But there's this empathy and the celebration of one another's story. So it's always just beautiful to see that, to see a classroom of kids just all getting along and supporting each other, but to see this on a major scale, it's always refreshing every time we come to the conclusion of an exhibition.
I love the fact that, too, I believe anyone can go in and see those exhibitions at the end. Like, I can just go on the website and check it out and see for myself what folks are up to. And I was browsing a few of them before we got on the podcast, and I was just really struck by, one, how emotional a lot of those stories are, but two, how like silly and playful and kid-like they are because they're designed by children. So they have that vibe that I just, I don't know, it reminds me of when I was a teacher, and it just comes across as hyper authentic in ways that a lot of platforms perhaps do not. But I am curious about, you mentioned that the platform's hyper flexible, that a lot of folks could use it, and I totally get that. But I'm curious about, what are the common issues that educators and students run into? Do you anticipate challenges? Do you see the tool managed in ways perhaps that you didn't want it to be, or that you would reframe in ways that you would prefer it to be used? Who is this for? How can we troubleshoot those issues?
One of the things that, and this is coming, put my educator hat on, one of the things that I found to be a challenge, more so because for me, I could see this and I just automatically connect it to how I could apply this in different content areas. And we did see that, there's some people, as Tony had mentioned or Britt had mentioned, they just put in the box, oh, this is Pixar, it must be art. But for me as an educator, as a social studies teacher, I see this like, oh, this is an authentic way to really assess a student's understanding of a concept. And all right, I might take some of the liberties of creating whatever story you want, but what if you lived in Mesopotamia during this era? And really now letting those students start creating this world within the subject area. As a science teacher, what if copper didn't exist? A lot of times, you'll find, I kind of found it a little challenge to see that teachers were missing how this applies beyond just one content area. And really, as Tony mentioned, it's storytelling. So getting kids to be able to articulate a story in any content area using a process that brings together collaboration, in-depth thinking, student-driven, it really enriches this learning. So, trying to make sure that every teacher sees the opportunity, that we learned that to be a bit more challenging than we anticipated. Now, we have been making great progress in that, but that was one for me as an educator and even as a principal. I should have known this, that every teacher doesn't think through that project-based lens. But, again, that was one of the bigger challenges that I could say that personally I felt.
I don't know. I'm just struck by how interesting that question is, just on its face, like the idea of what if the world did not have copper. Like those are questions I think would be really interesting for adults to explore, get into some speculative fiction stuff. But no, I totally see that, because that's a reaction that we've received as an organization presenting the tool, is that like, this sounds great, but I'm not an art teacher. It's like, well, they don't need to be good at art. Are there anything else, or is there anything else that you would add to that?
I think related to the, how many disciplines is this applied to, lifting up a level, we want all of our courses, stories, startup, music, science, whatever, to be really authentic, to how things are done in the real world. And because they're authentic, they're naturally multidisciplinary. So in the case of story, it's not just digital media, it's not just writing, it's not just art, it's not just using digital tools. It's multidisciplinary, as the world is. And most schools aren't set up for multidisciplinary learning, right? So we're constantly hearing, well, how does this fit into my English class, or how does this fit into my math class? And it certainly does, but it's more than that. And trying to, get past some of those structural barriers, I think is, something that we're going to be working to solve for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the overall goal would be that the pedagogy and content come together, that folks would adapt to you to make their courses more interdisciplinary, and you would adapt to them to ensure that it's broad enough that folks can use it in whatever way that they want to. Because that is an issue that a lot of like progressive education, human-centered education, whatever you want to call it, runs into, is that they want to do all these interesting, novel things, but they feel like the way that their classes are set up structurally just don't allow them to, because there aren't interesting questions to be had. Now you could do some creative non-compliance / creatively look at the standards and probably make that work. But it requires you to be trained in that or have experience with that type of thinking.
Another barrier we've seen is this, which is too bad, is this gallery system itself, which if you buy into it, you see it's amazing. I would say you can improve on a system that is a whole bunch of students being inspired and learning by each other. There is no better than that. That is the best. But in order to get there, you have to let go a little bit and trust the system of a whole bunch of students talking to each other, even though it's fully moderated. There's no private messaging. We've made it as safe as can be, but on its surface, when people hear student feedback across schools, a flag will go up for certain people. And as Tony mentioned, I don't think that problem ever goes away. At best, you could chip away at it. And so we've had situations where schools are maybe just want their students, like a walled garden around their students only, as one kind of a fix. But we've always tried to push for just keep it one big open community, because the more people in the community, the better it works. But that's a different thing, and it's kind of a square peg, round hole for many schools.
Right. Yeah, I totally get that from like a privacy, data security, fear perspective. But at the exact same time, if the goal is to create an authentic learning experience, school's probably going to be the only place where you would ever turn away outside communities and restrict them beyond everything else that you do in your daily life. So I totally get that. I did want to tackle, while we're on this discussion, you had mentioned that you have an entrepreneurship curriculum coming up. I think it was alluded to also some video game concept things. What are the other projects that you're working on beyond just Story Xperiential?
I'll jump on one, which is entrepreneurship is, we believe, our next offering that we want to pilot actually very soon in January 2025. And it fits our model very nicely because the output, the industry recognizable prototype in this case, is a pitch deck that the students talk over approximately 3 to 4 minutes. And so that's just an incredible artifact for anyone to create. And our system is designed that, as you go through the program, you gradually flesh out your pitch deck one step at a time. And at the end, you've pitched it so many times that, you're very comfortable with the idea and the community has a chance to shape it. And so that's one. That's what's coming up next. And I'll throw it to the others because we have some other fun ideas.
Yeah, we mentioned video game design, and we've got a pretty well worked out curriculum flow. So we're scheduled to start production on that early next year. And then beyond that, we've been brainstorming about lots of other possibilities, music. And one of the things we try to do in these experientials is, demonstrate that, in the music industry, not everybody is a vocalist, not everybody is an instrumentalist. There are lots of other jobs. There's promotion, there's advertising, there's PR, there's production, there's sound mixing, there's, all sorts of other jobs that people don't generally think of. And that's part of what we try to do. So as we look ahead, we'd like to have offerings in basically every domain that covers, every kind of career you can imagine.
So if folks want to learn more, they want to get involved, they want to partner with you, where would they start?
Well, they can send mail to us, info@storyexperiential.com. Partnerships are really interesting.
First, make sure they spell experiential with an X, no E at the beginning. Okay, I was going to say we have a pretty interesting project that's out right now. We did in partnership with Array 101 and Ava DuVernay that, would be great to share with the educational community based off the film Origin that she released. And there is a great opportunity to really dive into that film and unpack it a lot deeper and actually give students their experiences, tell their origin stories or share their origin stories, which is focused about the caste system on a global level. So again, very, very exciting project with Array 101 that we worked on with them.
That sounds amazing.
Story Xperiential is always open for registration. If someone wants to check it out at any time, we kind of have rolling admissions. So check out storyexperiential.com for that.
I know it's just kind of a basic 101, but thank you so much. I appreciate it, Britt, Tony, and Dennis.
Awesome. This was really great. Well done.
Thank you again for listening to our podcast at Human Restoration Project. I hope this conversation leaves you inspired and ready to start making change. If you enjoyed listening, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast player. Plus, find a whole host of free resources, writings, and other podcasts all for free on our website, humanrestorationproject.org. Thank you.